Today's first reading is for me one of the saddest passages in the prophetic writings. The prophet Jeremiah has warned the people about the great disaster that was about to befall his country. He has preached angry oracles of judgment, but the people would not listen to him. And in today's reading, chapter 14, he suddenly switches to a lamentation, describing in detail the great tragedy that is about to happen to his country. Listen to what he says. He is weeping. He says, "Let my eyes stream with tears day and night without rest over the great destruction which overwhelms the virgin daughter of my people, over her incurable wound." Jeremiah would visualize for them how they would fall into the hands of the Babylonian Empire, how they would lose their freedom and end up as a province of Babylon, and its citizens as exiles or exiled slaves in a foreign land. I do not think anyone in his right mind would want to become a prophet if God gave him the gift of visualizing what is about to happen. Jeremiah talks about seeing dead bodies violently slaughtered, littering the streets of Jerusalem. He also talks about the survivors, the widows and the orphans dying of hunger. He cries out to God and laments, "God, why have you struck us a blow that cannot be healed?" He could not bear the thought that his people had been deluded into believing that a time of peace and prosperity, a time of healing and well-being was going to come. Alas, what was really about to happen was a time of terror and disaster for the people. Too bad, as recommended by our lectionary, we started reading only from verse 17. If only we had started reading from verse 13, we would have known what the prophet is really weeping about. Because the people couldn't say that they were not told or they were not warned about this. They were. But they didn't listen. They chose to listen to the false prophets. So from verse 13, you hear about false prophets. Listen to how he describes the false prophets. They speak lies using my name, says the Lord. I did not send them, says God. I had nothing to do with them. I did not ask them to speak for me. But they dared to prophesy anyway. And what came out from their mouths? Lying visions, foolish predictions, deceptions from their own imaginations. These false prophets were blinded by money and power. They said only what was pleasing to the king. They said only positive things about the policies of the king. They even accused the true messengers of being false prophets. They attacked the prophets for being pessimistic, for being critical, for being negative. And they only made the people complacent, assuring them that everything was okay, that there was nothing to be worried about, that God was in control. You know, the prophet Jeremiah was even arrested by the ruling authorities. He was thrown first into a cistern, and later he was made to languish in jail. That is why sometimes you get the impression that the poor Jeremiah is so disheartened. He wants to quit the job. But in this particular lament, he is so deeply affected by the coming disaster. Suddenly, from a prophet, he switches to being a priest. Actually, Jeremiah belonged to a priestly family. Suddenly, the tone changes. He confesses the sins of his people, hoping perhaps that God would withdraw the punishment that was about to befall them. And so Jeremiah says, "We recognize, O Lord, the guilt of our fathers, that we have sinned against you. Remember, O Lord, your covenant with us. Do not forsake us. Do not break off from us." Prophets do not normally speak this way. Jeremiah is desperately making an act of atonement for his people, despite all the violence and all the persecution that he had suffered in their hands for just doing his job as a messenger of God. You know, this bitter lamentation cannot but remind me of Jesus himself. In Luke chapter 13, he is also prophesying disaster, the fall of Jerusalem, but this time under the Roman Empire, 6 centuries later. How history would repeat itself. And like Jeremiah, we are told that Jesus also cried. He wept over Jerusalem. Listen to what Jesus said while looking at Jerusalem. You know, that place in the Mount of Olives, which is called Dominus Flevit. There is a chapel there with the shape of a tear. And you look through the window, you have a perfect view of the old city of Jerusalem. And according to tradition, that's where Jesus sat, looking at Jerusalem, weeping in lamentation. Here is what he said: "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets, you who stoned those God sent to you." He also speaks in the tone of lamentation and says, "How many times have I yearned to gather you, or to gather your children, as a mother hen gathers her brood under her wings. But you were unwilling." And then the oracle of judgment follows. "Behold, your house will be abandoned." And he's talking about the temple, which will be destroyed by the Babylonians, by the Romans. Brothers and sisters, God can only offer salvation, but God will never force it on us, because He gave us free will. He respects our freedom to choose good against evil. But how can we choose good if we cannot even distinguish it from evil? Sometimes, what seems too obvious to some people might not be obvious to other people. The gospel is warning us that seeds, both good and bad, are growing together in the same field. Remember, I said, we're not the seeds, we are the field. We will be our own judge if we never learn to hate evil and love good. If we never develop the spiritual intelligence or the wisdom of heart that it takes to be able to discern between right and wrong. If we do not do what our faith is asking of us, which is to reject Satan and to believe in Jesus Christ as the way, the truth, and the life.